How did the bebop jazz prodigy Clint Strong end up in Merle Haggard's band in the 1980s? Clint was easily one of the most exotic and colorful players in mainstream country music in the 1980s. People either loved or hated his playing with Merle Haggard. For me, it's probably the best version of The Strangers that exists. Why did Clint and Merle part ways, and what happened to Clint Strong after his tenure with Merle Haggard? I'm going to try to answer some of those questions and show you the highlights of what footage does exist from this very dynamic chapter of The Strangers. This is Merle Haggard, the Clint Strong years. So as you can tell from these clips, I mean, Clint was a phenom, but he was not at all a country player, and Merle already had Roy Nichols in the band. Merle himself was playing rhythm and lead, as always, of course, and the band had already ballooned in size to the degree that when Clint joined the band, he would become the 11th person on stage in the Strangers live show in 1985 when he joined. So what exactly happened? How did this take place? Singer-songwriter Freddie Powers, who I just featured in another video, has a big role in all of this. Merle was enamored with Freddie Powers in the 80s, and the two of them became very close friends. Musically, one of the spin-offs of this collaboration was the jazzification of Merle's sound. Merle always had a touch of Bob Wills in his music, but this bond with Freddie found Merle diving much deeper into the jazz hat. He's really creating here a hybrid country jazz sound, right? Not really a country swing, but actually a full-on country jazz music. It's like a hybrid style that Freddie Powers was famous for. And Merle kind of creates his own version of that sound as well. The 1985 album A Friend in California is probably the best example we have of this. It's an album with a very strong jazz feel, and in fact it features 5 songs written or co-written by Freddie Powers himself. There's a small horn section which has brass and wind. It's rounded out by the playing of Roy Nichols, Clint Strong, Norm Hamlet, and so on. We'll come back to that album a little bit later. To make this whole thing a bit more mystical, it's actually going to be Freddie Powers who introduces Clint Strong to Merle Haggard. And I've got Clint here describing the situation himself.
Were you with Merle Haggard for how long? 10 years?
About 9.5 years, yes, sir. I started with him in '85. I went to high school with Freddie Powers Jr.
I had a job with Freddie Jr. and their little band. They had a little kind of country / top 40 band, and they were traveling around doing the Nevada circuit. As our time was winding up there, we were going to get a little time off, we decided we'd go out to the lake and stay with his dad for a couple of days. Well, that's where Merle's resort was. That's where Freddie Sr. was living. So I went out there, started doing some stuff with Freddie Sr., and then Merle came around, and Roy Nichols had quit the band, and Tiny Moore had died. So they needed a player, and I was in the right place at the right time. And I lived up there on those houseboats for the first couple of years that I was with Merle. It was great.
You were a pretty young guy at that time, too, right?
I was 19, yeah.
Wow.
And then the next year I was 20.
So Clint is living in one of Merle Haggard's houseboats on Lake Shasta. Freddie Powers is Clint's neighbor on the one side, and on the other side, in another houseboat, is the drummer Biff Adams. Merle himself is also living on the lake in his own houseboat, and Merle has a nightclub in town that is hosting touring country acts coming through, like Clint Black, Tammy Wynette, and so forth. And so Merle introduces Clint to all these players coming through, and Clint sits in with some of the bands, and so by all accounts it seems that this is officially how Clint sort of works his way into the Strangers. And you got to admit, it's a pretty serendipitous beginning for Clint Strong. There's a few concerts that have surfaced on YouTube, the best of which is probably the first Austin City Limits in '85. The official release of this concert is an assorted set list, the kind you would expect to hear at a Haggard show. However, during that taping, the band also performed a second set, which wasn't intended to air, and In that set, they're performing the entire album of A Friend in California, front to back. Miraculously, some of that footage has surfaced. The most fascinating of which might be the best solo Clint ever took playing with Merle. This event is one of the first big public appearances of this new lineup featuring Clint on guitar. Of course, some of you have probably heard the rumored story about how Clint left the band, and yes, we're going to get into that a little bit later. I'm going to show you some of these clips that I've arranged here. I've put them all in chronological order, so one thing you're going to notice when you watch these clips is how the excitement and nervous energy we felt watching that clip we just saw. That energy is not really there on the later clips. I think you'll be able to kind of feel the energy change throughout the years and into the 90s.
Also tortures Clint Strong.
I guess really I should have said country blues swing hybrid instead of just a country swing hybrid, because all three of those really are part of those clips. And those first two clips, Clint's just 19 years old. So we're also seeing him sort of grow up on stage in front of these audiences, which is like kind of incredible too. Here's the discography of the albums that I believe Clint has done with Merle. They started out on Amber Waves of Grain. That's a live album in '85. You can hear Clint out front on that album. A Friend in California, a really big album. Out Among the Stars came out in 86 as well. So the timeline fits in. I don't really have any proof of it, but he is playing on the Willie Nelson Seashores of Old Mexico. But really, we compare it down to just these two albums, which are by far the strongest, most noteworthy of those records. And A Friend in California, again, is just a really killer album. Chill Factor is another great album. Again, that country blues jazz kind of hybrid sound that he had going on.
When I got the gig with Merle, it was a whole different transition for me, and I had to decide how I was going to go about still being able to be a jazz player and function in a country situation and still be able to play my style over the type of tunes and progressions that Merle does.
You know, Merle at that time was really opening everything up for everybody to blow. And plus, Roy Nichols had left and Tiny Moore had passed. So he didn't have anyone really playing in that kind of... So I was in the right place at the right time for that.
Good.
So we can actually compare Roy Nichols and Clint Strong's playing. I've got two clips of them here lined up. So the burning question, what happened and how did Clint leave Haggard's band? The story that gets repeated often in forums, places like this, a YouTube video, is the story of how Merle, quote, stole Clint's girlfriend and then married her, and hence the end of Clint playing in the band. If that were true, Clint continued to play with Merle for 4 years after that incident allegedly took place. Apparently the scene was that while on the road, Clint had a girlfriend or had maybe met a girl, was seeing her, dating her. I'm not sure how involved they were. Partly rumor, partly speculation, and partly Haggard's own words himself. He invited Teresa back to his hotel room, and Clint was out in the hallway banging on the door, wanting to know where she was. And Haggard basically told him he was a bum and didn't know how to treat a woman, and that's the story that gets repeated. That being said, there are actually 3 articles on Merle where he references this incident. The first article is a 1990 article with the New Yorker, in which they're following Merle around, and there's plenty of mention of a girl named Teresa that's with him. That's in 1990. There's a Fighter, Life and Times of Merle Haggard. And the third article is in 2012 in GQ magazine, Merle Haggard, The Last Outlaw. So he does make reference to this event, but never really explicitly says that he fired Clint or that Clint quit the band or anything like that. And keep in mind, Merle went on to marry Teresa and stayed with her until his death. I have this great clip I'm going to show you now of Clint playing on stage with Ben and Noel Haggard. Now, of course, Ben is Merle and Teresa's son. So if there was any bad blood between Merle and Clint, would Ben Haggard be voluntarily bringing him on stage for his own show in 2021?
Back home before I die.
You can see that in that video that Clint obviously looks a lot different, and he has had a lot of health issues. Sadly, he is currently paralyzed, in like one side of his body and cannot even play guitar. He's in a nursing home. He may not play guitar again, but he is still alive, and I'm really hoping to do a feature video, Life and Times of Clint Strong. But anyway, that's the story. That was Merle Haggard, the Clint Strong years. Take care, keep it country. See you again sometime. I'm talking about the good old days of classic country music.